Lane Kiffin denies an ultimatum, and could the Saints be headed to Paris in 2026? We're talking about that and a whole lot more today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome back to another episode of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you, as always, for listening in to the pod. And make sure you follow us or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. That way you don't miss a single episode. Hopefully you are having a great Wednesday, getting halfway through the work week and getting that much closer to game day with the Cajuns playing Arkansas State on a big old Thursday night. We'll deep dive into that one on tomorrow's show. But I do want to talk about what's going on with the latest concerning a potential head coaching hire in Lane Kiffin. Obviously, he's been the one that's been making headlines. They're on an open date. So credit to Pat McAfee for being at the front end of this and saying, let's just go ahead and get him on to talk about the rumors that popped up on Monday night about what's going on with his future with the Ole Miss Rebels. Because there were some rumors popping up, in case you forgot. We talked about it on Tuesday's pod, that Ole Miss has given him an ultimatum to make a decision about his future with the Rebels. And Lane Kiffin was on the Pat McAfee show yesterday saying that's absolutely not true. There has been no ultimatum, anything like that at all. And so I don't know where that came from. Like a lot of stuff that comes out there. We're having a blast. I love it here. And then ESPN wound up doing a little bit more digging. And sources are telling them that Ole Miss officials are pressing Lane Kiffin and his agent Jimmy Sexton for a resolution. There's been no word of it being an outright ultimatum, but they want him to say, hey, here's my decision on the future. That way they are able to prepare for the postseason and anything that could change before long. Again, you've got one more game before the Egg Bowl. Yeah, one more game, and then it's the Egg Bowl. Excuse me. And yes, Ole Miss is on the outside looking in of the SEC championship game with Georgia and Texas A&M being above them. Now, again, barring anything out of the ordinary with the big game against Texas coming up on Black Friday, that could throw a monkey wrench in all of this. But I feel like that's going to be a lot. There's a lot of doubt in that statement. Same with Georgia. Georgia wraps up against Georgia Tech at 16th rank. Yellow Jackets. But I still think Georgia handles their business. So you're going to have those two teams face off in Atlanta. Ole Miss, more likely than not, barring a breakdown in the final game of the 2025 regular season, they're going to be making the playoffs, and Alabama will be on the outside looking in, as they should be, despite a pretty good season, even though it was a rough start for that program earlier in the year. But the big key is that there is no ultimatum. I think this is more, hey, tell us what the hell's going on here. That way we can be prepared for what's going to come. Heaven forbid you are going into a college football playoff not knowing who's going to be running things. That is a tough place to be if you are any team. You don't know if your head coach is going to even be there. That's not the way you want to see it. That's not the way I would want to. That's not what I would want to deal with, basically. If I'm a athletic director of a program, is knowing that your head coach is more likely than not going to be out the door. If he is, he wants to get this opportunity, great. Just let us know if you're wanting to stick around for the CFP or if you're going to be making this move at the end of the regular season. And having Jimmy Sexton there, absolutely, it's the way to be. And again, he wants to say he loves it here. He had his running back hanging around with him. It's great. It's fantastic to see what he's been able to do with that program. He's turned Ole Miss into, and they have a viable chance of winning a national championship, which they've never done before. That alone is enough of a coaching resume that makes you kind of say, all right, let's go ahead and get this guy. That said, I said it a lot on the pod Tuesday. There's no doubt in my mind that Jimmy Sexton is playing both LSU and Florida, he's playing them against each other. This is maximizing your opportunity to make a boatload of money. And they're going to prolong this as long as possible to maximize the value. Because I firmly believe that both of those teams, and also, Ole Miss, need him a lot. And I mean a lot more than Lane Kiffin needs them. I think no matter where he goes at this point, Lane Kiffin can write his own ticket and turn a team around into a contender. I think outside of being in a group of 5 program, which he won't go back down to, he has proven himself with Ole Miss that he can take any team and turn them into megastars. At the end of the day, I think if you're LSU at this point, you've got to figure out how to keep your options open. You have to determine, is it going to be worth kind of sticking out this entire process? Because again, they're going to hold you up for a good bit of money in my mind. Do you wait to get the big guy, or are you just going to go ahead and hurry up and say, I'm not waiting on Jimmy Sexton and Lane Kiffin to play us like fools? Let's go get somebody that we think can make this a competitive program in about 1 or 2 years. Because then you go down to the next tier, which, again, I don't think this is a bad thing. And Braden Fajoko, former LSU Tiger, actually talked about this on social media, saying that, Kenny Dillingham, John Summerall, who I don't think is going to be going to LSU, mainly because in-state coaches don't necessarily jive all that well. Case in point, Billy Napier. We've talked about that a lot. Brent Key, Lincoln Riley. If you pull Lincoln Riley out of USC, that would be an incredible coup. It also would make that LSU-Oklahoma game a little bit more juice on it, if you will. But I don't think I necessarily would want him, because I feel like the bloom is off the rose on that one. Eli Drinkwitz, former App State head coach, I wouldn't hate that one. And he also brought up Frank Wilson, which I just feel like if you have to resort to basically pulling an Ed Ogeron again, it's not a knock against Frank Wilson. Just not a fan. Just not a fan of running back somebody that's a interim head coach and ripping off the tag, because it just seems like that's going to be a stopgap. And after a couple of years, you're going to give him the old heave-ho. You're not going to let him come back as an assistant. And also, I feel like there's some things that we haven't necessarily been able to talk about all that much regarding Frank Wilson and his past. A lot like what happened with Verge Osbury, but I digress. So let's flip it on over to the New Orleans Saints, because this is actually kind of crazy. I saw this Tuesday night, and the fact that Dennis Lauscha, the Saints president, is basically saying, fully expecting the Saints to play a regular season game in Paris next season. According to Jeff Duncan of NOLA.com, he said at the Greater New Orleans Quarterback Club last night, you might hear in the next couple weeks that we might be having a game internationally, and that game might be in Paris. We have the rights to the country of France and Monaco, so that makes so much sense, we think. We're really excited about that possibility, end quote. And the Stade de France, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, would be the primary venue for the game. They hosted the 2024 Olympics, so it's great to see that. And the NFL wants to have more NFL games that are international starting in 2026. Which I've mentioned a lot, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. Just because, one, it takes away a home game for a franchise. Yes, they're considered quote-unquote home games, but neutral site games in the NFL just don't seem right. Again, I understand they want to expand things. The Jaguars play a game every year in London, and eventually, I feel like in 5 years or so, the NFL is going to run back the idea of NFL Europe. maybe they take the UFL and say, hey, we're going to make you the European League, just because not necessarily sure what is going on there. But the fact that we're getting a international game for the Saints, it's been a minute. Like, the Saints have not had too many international games in recent history. You know, they hadn't played one since 2022 when they played the Minnesota Vikings. But it feels like more and more likely they're going to be a very strong possibility to play one next season. And playing a game in Paris, I think it makes sense. It makes sense to see them be a part of that. They have a national partnership with the Paris Musketeers to grow the sport in Europe, which is great. But I don't think that I get, trying to make this a global game, but at the same time, I've never been a big fan of doing the games in Europe because the actual football, that is the game that's never going to go away and never going to let go of its stranglehold. It's not like what's been happening with, baseball, where the NFL has pretty much taken over baseball by storm. It's going to be a very difficult sell. Now, moving up to Australia, like some games are planning to be, would be interesting. Having it in Paris, that's a new market for them. Hopefully they can kind of get things done and improve that. The NFL is looking to go back to Mexico City, which I'm not a fan of because those games have been absolute bleep shows from the jump. So hopefully everything can kind of turn around. Can be turned around and we see something really nice as we head into 2026. The Saints team, I think, wants to get some international games going. And hey, if I can figure out a way to get credentialed for that in 2026, hey, I'm all the way here for it. All right, one more thing before we get on out of here, and that is about the College Football Playoff Committee. They have their latest set of rankings that came out today. And needless to say, it is very interesting to see how things are. Bama's on the borderline of being on the outside looking in, like we talked about earlier. A lot of things can and will change. But as of right now, the 12-team bracket, based on the current rankings, has Tulane as the 12 seed. They would be playing Texas Tech. Now, they've only got 2 more games left on the schedule, and we've talked about it a little bit last week. I firmly believe they can run the table and win the AAC championship game. Again, purely based off of what we've seen. They'd be dealing with Navy. Navy's a good team, but I think Tulane can handle business, especially with the way they've kind of bounced back after the tough loss to UTSA at the end of October. They came away with some really nice wins over Memphis and then Florida Atlantic last weekend. Now it's just making sure they can close out. That's been a big problem for them, being able to close out ball games, but I think they'd be able to handle it against 2 teams that are more towards the bottom half of the conference. They're playing Temple and they're playing Tulane. Playing Charlotte, 2 teams. Again, you're playing Temple. They're 5-5. Charlotte 1-9. You should be able to handle business against Charlotte on Saturday, but you're going to have to deal with a little bit more pushback, I think, with Temple rather than the other team that you're going to be going up against, and then you're dealing with Navy. If you can handle business, and more importantly, you win the next 2 games, you're hosting the AAC championship game or the American championship game. So used to call them the AAC, but they want to call them, identify as the American now. You do that, brother, you're heading to the college football playoff. And yes, it seems like more likely than not, they would lose to Texas Tech if everything works out the way it seems to be. But doing that would be a huge step in the right direction. Now, whether or not, John Summerall is going to be coaching by then remains to be seen. But at this point in time, having a shot to be in that game, tremendous to be the American champ. Obviously, James Madison, Navy, North Texas will have a say in this. JMU has the best strength of record and game control, but the strength of schedule and the quality win early in the year against Northwestern, that is something that weighs a ton when it comes to what these experts like to look at. Again, Northwestern's not a great team on paper, but it's still a Power 4 win. At the end of the day, those are big. Same with the win against Duke. Again, two not necessarily great teams, but they're still in that conversation that's worth having. So hopefully they win these next two games. They host the American Championship game, and I'm almost certain Yeoman Stadium will be fully rocking there. And then they could probably win that, get to the playoff, and then we can start talking about maybe there's something really cool brewing over in New Orleans, which is definitely refreshing because sports lately in the state of Louisiana, and especially New Orleans, haven't necessarily had a whole lot to cheer for. So hopefully we get a lot more of that. But that'll about do it for today's edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Make sure you follow us today on social media. Just search Louisiana Lunch Hour. And more importantly, go ahead and check us out on YouTube and subscribe to us today. Until tomorrow, talk to you later.